English translation 913th contact Thursday, July 3rd, 2025, 8:52 HRS.
Greetings, Edward, my friend. I'm glad to see you well and not looking as strained as you have been lately.
Thank you, but greetings also, dear friend. You know, the last few days have been a bit stressful, because I had a lot to think about, which worried me. Because I had to deal with looking after a woman on the phone who... She called me several times, and of course it was my duty to look after her until she... But now everything is okay again. She has come to terms with herself, so there is nothing more to worry about.
I see. And you are predestined to deal with these kinds of problems. You have done it successfully many times in your life.
Yes, but we do not have to talk about that.
Correct. But I do want to say that it would not be my own business to deal with other human beings' worries in such a way that they cannot deal with them themselves and even...
Well, to each his own. And I also learnt what your grandfather Svath taught me, and I knew how to apply as a boy. For example, with Louise Meyer when her husband died. As a boy, I also worked with her on the smallholding, learning how to mow with a scythe, how to milk cows, and how to smoke sausages and bacon, which she did in the kitchen because she had a so-called smoke kitchen that was black and full of soot because she smoked in it. I remember that on the north side of the smokehouse, there was a 2-light window with 6 divided panes, which Louise cleaned meticulously to let light into the kitchen. The window was next to the exit door. Another led into the barn, and a third into the parlor, or living room, where the two of us ate zvieri, or vesper, or had our snacks together. The doors were well sealed so that the smoke from the kitchen could not escape.
My grandfather made a few notes about that in his annals, as he also did that you.
All right, I know what you were going to say. But that is not so important, because learning and being able to do all sorts of things has been inherent in me from boyhood, or should I say from babyhood, and I have also kept that up all my life. And everything I learnt I could always use at some point and somewhere, both here in Switzerland and in many countries around the world. But what I actually want to tell you is that I finished my latest book the day before yesterday and gave it to Bernadette for the first time for proofreading. When she has finished correcting it, it will be back with me to complete the corrections, after which it will be passed on to Christian and Daniela, and probably Bridget for correction work. Ava and I are still looking for a suitable title, while Piero then only has to produce the book cover according to what the two of us decide. You can view my entire work here on the computer if you are interested.
I would love to, that is what I want to do.
Good, then look here. Wait, yes, here. There are 127 pages, which in the book is probably a little over 300 pages. It is not necessary to read the whole thing, but I think you just have to look at the structure of the articles. The whole book is about various things that need to be clarified and therefore also answer all kinds of questions and other things that are not really asked about. But I think a few words should be said about them anyway.
Thank you. Of course, I think the structure, as you say, is good. These poems here at the end of the book are the ones in which you and Ptah removed various statements because you had reservations about publicizing them at the time.
Yes, that was the case, because there were telephonic threats to which Ptah felt it would be better to leave such and such out.
You must have done the correct thing there, because I think trouble would probably have come out of it if you had not done what was really necessary.
That was also counseled to us by Mr. who had an important role in the government of Germany, and he then often visited Guido and complained to him, and me that the government of Germany was being mismanaged by neo-Nazis, and that those who did not belong to them had nothing to say, and had to remain silent or simply go along with it against their attitude. Which was also not correct. He recently told me excitedly over my secret phone that this was increasingly the case today, and that he knew exactly what was going on because, as he was no longer actively involved in the government himself, he had confidants in the SPD party who would tell him exactly what the individual members of the government were up to. He said that the major parties were only cowardly afraid of Russia and spreading hatred towards it, as was also happening in the EU dictatorship, and that they wanted to ban those important parties that were striving for peace with Russia, thus mendaciously accusing them of right-wing extremism. All the neo-Nazis in the German government and the EU dictatorship, and he explicitly mentioned names of key figures, craved war and at the same time were cowardly afraid and wanted to build up a large, well-armed army once again to wage war against Russia, as Hitler had already done. Top leaders in Germany even spied that the German army itself would intervene in the war in Ukraine. The political grandees of France and England would also join in, just as all these warmongers would encourage other European states to act in the same way and instill fear in them. The neo-Nazi pack of the SPD party, as he explicitly called the German government, as well as the EU dictatorship and the other European states, are on the verge and on the way to conjuring up a new world war, whereby the Ukraine war is also to be prolonged through a mendacious friendship with Zelensky and Ukraine, and with war-promoting arms deliveries. On the one hand, this is to justify their own war mania to the people, and on the other hand to wear down Russia, with America standing in the background and being responsible for this, which is waiting to be able to include Russia in its world domination mania.
All this, but about that it is. Therefore, we should also not talk about it any further. Consequently, every word is too much and will be blamed on you.
What I have said is only what Mr. Quetzal told me on the phone, so if I only repeat his words and do not add any things, etc. Even if I will not talk about it because I mustn't anticipate the future, your grandfather already taught me that because that would make the whole thing worse. As you know, I do not engage in politics myself, although I do take the liberty of saying what I realize and what arises politically. What I do want to say, however, is that I know very well that this war in Ukraine is largely not being fought by the Ukrainian and Russian military, but on both sides with many thousands of mercenaries from all over the world, including murderous Swiss, Americans, and Germans, as well as other Europeans from all the EU dictatorship countries. And the fact that vicious war crimes are being committed, as is also the case in Israel under the orders of the mass murderer Netanyahu, is not in question, but is being concealed just as much as what is happening in Russia. Only Zelensky and Ukraine are ever reported in a biased way, with reports on the damage caused there, how many people have died, and what has been destroyed. But what is happening in Russia by the equally murderous and destructive Ukrainian army, which in any case consists largely of unscrupulous foreign mercenaries and other murder enthusiasts from all over the world, is unjustifiably and biasedly kept completely silent. So there is no fair reporting on what is actually happening and what is happening, but only partisanship in favor of the arms beggar Zelensky, who is also getting outrageously rich, like dictator Trump in America. This, while the Ukraine war is America's fault, in particular, ex-President Biden and the rabble of his supporters who wanted to bring Ukraine into the NATO alliance by any means necessary, despite the promise of the USA, which mendaciously swore in the 1990s that there would never be an eastward expansion by the NATO murderous organization from defeated Germany. But a short time later, this lying and deceitful promise was broken, and eastern state after eastern state was taken over by NATO and Russia was increasingly constricted, whereby in April 1949 this murderous organization was decisively co-determined by the U.S. President Harry S. Truman.
Wait a minute. My grandfather listed a few things in his annals in this regard, which I have read, that Truman's purpose at the time was not that, namely not the true purpose of a real defense alliance with a North Atlantic treaty, but to be able to realize America's hegemonic delusion in a sneaky, lying, and deceitful way as a result. This in such a wise that all the member states that joined the NATO alliance, and that far into the future, would wage victorious wars for America, after which America could then establish itself in the defeated states. That my grandfather and you?
But I do not want to talk about that because I already know what you're going to say. And that everything is true. I was already able to with Svath, but that mustn't be told openly, what your grandfather said back then. But that really should not be said. But it is true that the fellow howlers of those countries that have joined the NATO murderous organization are so simple-minded that, according to Truman's idea, they are all doing the warlike and other and secret, murderous and underhand and mean dirty work to achieve the goal of American world domination. And all the countries that have joined NATO since its inception are obliged by their lowly intelligent and simple-minded and idiotic murderer militaries and rulers, as well as other accomplices and supporters, to fulfill the American hegemonic delusion in accordance with the treaty. And if the rulers and peoples do not finally wake up from their stupidity and recognize America's true intentions and act accordingly and do not free themselves from NATO, they will soon belong to America, which has already brought about 38% of all countries under its rule, and where America is sitting in the countries. The same fate will befall the EU dictatorship, which the completely irresponsible horndogs in Bern also want to join. With their supporters throughout the country treasonously shouting pro and hooray, and agreeing to treaties being concluded with the EU dictatorship in Bern, without the consent of the people. This is something that has already seen Switzerland's neutrality badly demolished by the absolutely irresponsible and treacherous Bernese government. This is how Switzerland can be completely sidelined by further such absolutely irresponsible, treacherous and autocratic escapades of elements unfit for government, irresponsible, powerful and conscienceless people in the government. This is because, alongside them, the righteous co-governors have no chance of asserting their arguments for what is good and correct, or are simply scrounged over, which brings the whole country of Switzerland down in every conceivable respect. If the entire government in Bern and the authorities in the communes and cantons everywhere continue to muddle along as before, citizens will be increasingly restricted in their freedom by new and completely nonsensical laws. Ordinances, rules, regulations, and recommendations, etc., citizens will even be forbidden to vote and be denied the right to vote. The fact that citizens are even forbidden and penalized for doing the correct thing for nature, wildlife, their very own land and forest in the surrounding area, and are forbidden to do so with threats, fines, etc., or are punished for doing so and monitored by the police and secretly photographed, effectively knocks the bottom out of the barrel. And to bring harm and prohibitions against all reason, and worse than was the case in the old days of the bailiffs. But there is still something to be said about Switzerland, where, slowly but surely, more and more injustice is being done to the people, as I have already said, and the longer the more the people are being bailiffed, and this is being remedied before it is too late. And this must be done, if at all, without rebellion and in such a way through reason and rationality, but that the people revolt and defend themselves sensibly against it, and remove those evil rulers from the governments and authorities, etc., who are no good for their posts, but only cause mischief. However, whether the Swiss will ever do this is not questionable, but the answer is that it will never happen, because the sluggishness as well as the indifference and irresponsibility in this regard will ensure that this will never happen and that everything will continue in the old framework, and the Swiss people will one day be completely unfree. The so-called perpetual armed neutrality will also no longer be of any use to them, which has already been treacherously destroyed by Bern.
What you say in this regard, I can understand that you denounce such things, because it is really not right for leaders to abuse their office, act contrary to the Constitution, and make high-handed decisions, which they are not authorized to do. As you have often mentioned in our recent conversations, this evil, which is becoming more and more prevalent, is already so advanced and prosperous that only a minority of the minority is aware of it due to the indifference of the people. This indifference of the people is not only related to the population of Switzerland, but to all peoples worldwide, as we have explored. It is also accompanied by an irresponsibility that has been manifesting itself for some time now in the form of a decline in reason and understanding. This is because the use of the life energy of creation has slackened, and Earth humans no longer endeavor to use it.
I know that, because the human being who allows himself to be carried away by this, or who has never endeavored in his life to think for himself in order to make himself a true human being, development is hopeless with him. It happens to such a person without him knowing it himself that he believes himself to be the greatest in the universe. But this cannot be made understandable to such a human being, because he is too lowly intelligent and simple-minded, and therefore not thinking to realize this. And as I have told you many times recently, Artificial intelligence is now intervening in the lives of Earthlings, which means that they no longer need their own minds and reason, and are now relying solely on AI, and are becoming stupid faster and faster. And this has been the case for some time now, and it is spreading faster and faster, even to members of the authorities and governments and everywhere else. This can also be seen from the fact that many governments and sections of the population have been so stupid, lowly intelligent and simple-minded for years that they have become warmongering neo-Nazis, and are therefore supplying weapons to the equally warmongering Zelensky in Ukraine, just as they allow the mass murderer Netanyahu to continue killing through his army, and nothing is done against him. And also not against the dictator Trump, who wants to eat the world and destroy everything. But now back to Switzerland, which probably has a unique political structure. But this is only of any use if the people are treated fairly on the one hand and remain free on the other and are not prevented, penalized or distorted by the authorities and the government, or even by the national government through incredibly lowly intelligent laws, regulations and rules as well as ordinances, etc., with threats, fines and bans as well as the police, etc. The people who want to do the correct thing are prevented, punished or harassed by loudmouths who believe that their professional training has made them knowledgeable and understanding of the corresponding subject matter, even though they understand absolutely nothing about the subject matter that they are complaining about in accordance with the law, or also in accordance with regulations, because they are completely unaware of the given circumstances, are unable to recognize them, or are simply too lowly intelligent to understand them. These know-it-alls do not understand their complete inability to understand the necessary work required to produce and change, or the necessary innovations to avoid damage, and are also unable to consider and comprehend these intelligently. This is brashly enforced by them with loud-mouthedness, erroneous, bogus suggestions, or extremely stupid advice, as well as with court rants, threats, and even the involvement of the police, and punished with fines, for which what was done well and correctly is still penalized. So on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is more than just regrettable for Switzerland, but an effective disaster, if now and in the near and distant future the entire national government in Bern, as well as all cantonal governments and all municipal authorities, do not take immediate and urgent sovereign action to put Switzerland's internal laws, ordinances, and rules, etc., back in order and thus restore the freedom to which the people are entitled. On the one hand, how sovereign it is to also act in such a way that the Swiss government keeps itself free from any foreign powers, and accordingly forms and shapes everything independently, without membership of NATO or the EU dictatorship or any other connection to these or other similar organizations. And the fact that these organizations wield tremendous might, and that Switzerland would be left behind by them, is something that those in power and the majority of the people also apparently do not understand. The fact is that those who exercise power over the people in the office of the authorities, the government and the police, or who exercise such power in the family, in religions, sects, or in groups and associations, etc., do not understand that other human beings cannot understand or accept the injustice of the exercise of power, and that only a few find the courage to defend themselves against it with words or appropriate non-violent action and rights.
What we were talking about earlier, that would really also not be wise if you were to openly explain what my grandfather, and because that would really be fatal and also very unwise. And what you are saying now should also be considered because there is a tendency to want to dominate, as we have seen for some time now, which is unacceptable and can no longer be tolerated, because the committee is also dealing with this and will discuss whether should therefore be taken into consideration. The corresponding necessary article to be included in the Articles of Association is already being drafted so that it can be included in the Articles of Association.
I know that, it is. This has already been discussed several times, but nothing has changed. Of course, I also know that so I am not so stupid that I would not realize this and lead myself down the slippery slope, make up for it, and break all my bones in the process. I also have the possibility that I will only put dots if you dictate everything to me. But what I want to say is that the fact is, yes, as I saw for myself together with Bermunda about a year or so ago, What is going on in the war in Ukraine? The events, for example, when Ukrainian military shot up and murdered Ukrainian civilians, which was then meanly blamed on the Russians. And the fact that, while I am on the subject, Trump wants to let the absolutely irresponsible mass murderer and vicious war criminal and genocide perpetrator Netanyahu off the hook from the court in Israel and get away scot-free because he has been charged with corruption is the height of impudence and injustice, if this actually materializes. Just as if von der Leyen were to get off scot-free in the EU dictatorship when she is to be called to account before a committee as a result of blatant irregularities. But in principle, it is questionable whether anything will really be done about this power-hungry woman. Just as no action will be taken against the mass murderer and genocidist Netanyahu, because no crow pecks out the eyes of another crow.
I am aware of that, and what you said regarding what you observed together with Bermunda, that was recorded by her on notes she made. But we should also not spend time on that, because any words would be useless, because nothing would be done by all those responsible.
Unfortunately, that is the case, because people prefer to believe in a non-existent God and other nonsense instead of paying full and complete attention to reality and its truth. This is proven again by this letter here, which was sent to by someone from the Jehovah's Witnesses sect, the same sect to which Mrs. also belonged, who tried to shoot me through the office window in Hinwil. But the bullet whizzed past my right temple, ricocheted off a copper spiral, and tore a hole in the ceiling. Here read what the Sectarian wrote to ensnare as believers for Jehovah's Witnesses to prevent such events from occurring.
Then I want to read this, because I have never seen anything like it. This is, in my opinion, this is an impertinence, an animation as a result of fanaticism, whereby a human being is to be frightened and seduced and driven to a belief.
You see, this is how Earth humans are maltreated by sectarians and made docile to sectarianism. And it does not matter whether it is the churches of Catholicism, Protestantism, or sects such as these, etc., that have emerged from them. In this respect, some of these sects are radical when it comes to getting away from them once someone has joined them as a member. But she accepted that, because she really wanted to apologize, but she could hardly believe that I had nothing of the sort in mind. Because what was the point? I would only have got the woman into hot water, which would not have been correct, because she had realized that her actions were wrong. And there was no damage, apart from the fact that the copper coil was damaged, and there was a hole in the ceiling that I was able to paste over again. What I would also like to say is that I have never been interested in publicizing things that have been done against me, because for me, even in my adolescence, it was something that was simply over. Once it had happened, it could no longer be undone. What has happened is what has happened, and can therefore no longer be undone. And what crazy people have against me and my views and think that I have to be removed from the world is their business. And I do not see how I could change their minds and their hatred, because their whole behavior and opinion is their own business, and they have to deal with it themselves. Well, she recently complained to me that she was still being harassed again and again by believers in this sect, and simply could not find any peace, which is why I advised her to move away and not tell anyone where she was going. She has now done that, and is looking for a new place to live far enough away, and she no longer has to work because she is no longer dependent on work, and also has a pretty good nest egg, as she told me.
Your attitude to these attacks against you was already like that in your youth. As I also read in my grandfather's annals, and I am therefore aware that you were badly mistreated and beaten by people whom my grandfather also described as blind sectarians. As he also wrote, it was the case that you never told anyone about it, not even your parents.
That is right, and the reason I did not say anything was because I knew that it was not my father, who was a good-natured and calm human being, but my mother, who would go berserk and lash out at all the evil sectarian rabble. But I wanted to avoid that because it would only have created more evil all round. But that is not important because all of that is now more than 80 years in the past.
You think correctly with that, but what I now consider important myself, however, because we'll probably not engage in this impertinence of this letter, are your poems, which you wrote and set out and named as a young man in the 1940s. which will happen in coming times, like these poems here, which you have integrated into your book, and which I want to read as they are given unchanged in the original text. So leave them in my computer, as I am about to.
Well, they are not actually prophecies because the originals of my unguided poems are probably predictions, but as I said, not prophecies. This is because, together with your grandfather Svath, I was able to see for myself what would happen in the future. This was only possible by traveling with Svath into the future and past. The various omissions or some remarks, in earlier years when published by the Figu, which were removed, because they were not permitted or not responsible at the time of publication and would have led to attacks by certain people concerned and to accusations, are now included in full in these poems, although I hope that they will not cause offense in some quarters and that there will be a thunderstorm as a result. However, it would be reasonable to expect certain powerful and big-snouted people in certain governments to feel affected.
That may be, but let me read now, sure.
Here's a line by line. Non-poetic. English translation, preserving the number of lines 44 lines, and the original flow and meaning as best as possible, without turning it into poetry.
What will inevitably come to Switzerland?
The shepherd boy must be cautious of a bloody gang of criminals. Evil comes quickly in sheep's clothing and brings with it heavy and deadly suffering. The inner peace of the country breaks apart badly, and then death and destruction will laugh. One day, the country will be shaken by anarchism, by hatred and evil religious fanaticism. A great wave of robbery will come unexpectedly, years of crime, murder, and strife. In many places, bright fires of destruction will burn, and life will become unbearable. Traitors in the federal government in Ben will destroy the very core of neutrality, thus foolishly creating enmity, while still pocketing large wages. And natural forces will destroy much, great forests, beeches, ashes, and pines. Much water will flow and often surge, and many people will hope for help in vain. The climate will collapse, causing great damage, because people have poisoned it completely. A village in the canton of Valais will be completely destroyed, as a rockslide buries it unexpectedly, for the climate collapse will bring warmth and remove the mountain stability. The earth will quake and lightning will strike, and fierce storms will rage. 3 people will die violently. This triple murder will happen in Zurich. Federal councillors will prepare for treason in a maliciously dictatorial European Council. In Ticino, a large forest fire will blaze, burning down trees, and this soon. Then a deadly epidemic will rage, bred in China as an act of revenge. Alpine land, beautiful noble Switzerland, land of shepherds, this will happen, and it will begin soon. A great disaster will strike the SBB, but misfortune will also occur on a lake. Heavy snow in its pure white coat will bring unspeakable evil, hardship, and suffering. Many people will experience hell on earth in a very beautiful, beautiful mountain valley. One city will face grim grey terrorism, another will suffer from foolish euphoria. Aviation will also be badly affected, as will road traffic and prostitution. Much death will come to many, and bees will flee from a place when hunger shakes the country, triggered by an economic collapse. When signs appear in the sky, many people will cry. That, people of Switzerland, is what the new time brings soon. Monday, February 9, 1946, 13:30 HRS Edie Meyer, Niederflax 1253, Bullock.
What America brings for the future.
First, with clear words, it must be said again and again. That it must be said up front that in the future there will be a path of lament for the future of humanity. with misery, distress, much death, and harsh pain. The peoples of the earth are divided by war. The world war of the Nazi Reich is now over, but now the destructive time comes over the world, with death and destruction, and evil befalls humanity. The whole East will be forced by America, bringing hegemonic disaster, acting as a deadly weapon of war. Much will be destroyed on Mother Earth, harshly and very badly, through America's hegemonic madness, a ruinous insanity noise. Because of this, the earth will tremble and inside tear apart the earth, and countless lives and buildings will be destroyed over decades. From America's hegemonic jungle, evil wars will come, murdering, robbing, destroying, and many will lose their lives. America reveals itself as an evil sign in the coming dark time. When its hegemonic madness cries for wars and world domination, when evil breaks out from its centuries-old power jungle, its greed for world domination creates a malicious war frenzy. America's greed for hegemony reaches even the deepest earth tunnels, and everything will be very bad as great quakes roll over the earth, when through hate and war, fire and explosions, evil rumbles. The air will be torn, tortured, it rises, groans and screams, and hostility will fiercely glow among humans worldwide. The hearts of many earthlings tremble at the blow of destruction, rising high at night, and also during the day. The world shakes and flares and blows in smoke, wrapped in foul-smelling death smoke. America's hegemonic madness is to be named, because the earth will burn all around, far into the next millennium, because through America continuously evil is secretly stoked, which all the world then feels. Monday, 14th May 1948, 2:16
America, Europe, and the bear from the east.
America and the land of Europe will tremble, when from the east freedom comes with a firm hand, which is being suppressed by America and Europe. But they will be punished through a harsh lesson for the delusion of world domination they wickedly nurture, and with it place countries and peoples into dictatorships. America, built from the beginning only on deceit, will meanly continue to conquer the world with lies, to lead a dictatorship in the third decade of the next century, which will expand globally to gain world domination through radical lies, and Europe too will sink shamefully into banality in a shared dictatorship. While then in New Germany, Nazi-like figures, like before Isegrim, will at that time stupidly lead the sector of the state and naively stir up another world war. Their ignorance and hunger for power will overflow. They will then call for killing through war hordes. They will wickedly spread only hatred toward the east, thus making Europe furious and aggressive against the bear. The bear will remain calm but act in secret, and this will cause insecurity everywhere. The bear will be in the distance, the one who brings freedom, breaking down all injustice and all unfreedom, which is loudly echoed in many voices in America and Europe, as well as in many other countries around the world. The bear, coming from the east, will destroy them and resolve all evil into peace and freedom. But it will last a long time until then. With lamenting, a time of tears will be carried out into the world, because malicious terror full of dictatorship, hatred, and war will deny peace and freedom their victory. Then the wicked greed for world domination will tear the world apart, so that in many countries the screams of death will resound, because America and Europe spread unfreedom, striking down people with wars, hardship, and misery. The instigators of discord, whose actions are based on power, will be taught by the bear and made to understand that claims to world power stir up wicked unrest and lead humanity into death and ruin. Therefore the bear will tear apart all evil from America, and Europe will be promised the same. When violently from the world grabbing America wars destroy everything in the world, in all directions, when the same echoes from the European dictatorship and cries of murder resound wickedly in terrorism, then the bear will begin to bite into the unrest, and tear apart the wicked deeds of all Western powers. But all this will only happen in the distant future, as Sfath and I have seen in the far future. But it will come infallibly at the exact time when the West's greed for world power demands necessity. 7th of July 1949, Eddie Meyer, Niederflux 1253, Bulach ZH.M.
South America.
Now the grim and evil time has come upon the noble world as death and destruction rush swiftly across the earth. From the distant west, as well as from the distant east, it sweeps in as the final and deadly warning lesson. But also the land of Europe, with its far-reaching dictatorship, will in the future create unfreedom, coercion, and misery and destroy nature, for it will, power-hungry and Nazi-like, devour many states, so that their freedom will only be what is suitable to the dictatorship. In the future, the world, Mother Earth, will be shaken badly and wickedly, a mad work of Earth humans, their insane salvation of madness. Earthquakes will in the future violently tear apart the interior of the Earth, will kill many human lives, destroy buildings and homesteads. And when the giant warriors come from the deep Peruvian jungle, they will abduct women, even roll over villages and settlements. This will be the final sign of the extremely evil time to come, when the old Inca enemy then screams while murdering, howling, looting, breaking out from his centuries-old hiding place in the jungle, where he lives in leaf huts, as well as in a deep underground tunnel. In Peru, coming toward Tudene, the first great quake will roll, when deep within the earth all the fires and explosions rumble wickedly and tear apart the landscape, which rears up, groans and screams when volcanic fire will glow and rage far and wide across the world. The earth will tremble, quake in a wicked strike of annihilation, rearing up at any hour of the night, but also during the day. South America will tremble and blaze in strike and in smoke, enveloped in muffled roaring and vile grey death smoke. 16th March 1947, 20:04 hours, Eddie Meyer, Niederflux 1253, Bulach.
Simyase Silver Star Center, Thursday, the 4th of March 1976, 3:16 hours.
Before the following poem, I want to say that it was drafted in 1976, written and fully composed by me, Very, but only later reworked into a better poetic form, and everything was reinserted that had previously been removed for a planned publication because very serious threats had prevented the publication.
Worldwide unpleasantness.
It is America, Europe, the world with all its islands to name, then Japan, Arabia, China, India, and countries that burn. All will be shaken by droughts as well as earthquakes, so buildings, animals, and many human lives will be destroyed. But many earthquakes will also roll in the land of Turkestan, in Russia, Persia, Balkan states, Europe, and Afghanistan. No country will remain spared anymore on the Earth's globe. This prophecy now clearly and very distinctly proclaims. Tens of thousands of death cries will begin to scream. No ray of hope can anymore brighten the Earth world. Disease, plagues, wars, storms will rage all around, and then neither prayer, church singing, nor praising God helps. Drought as well as fire, disasters will fill the Earth world. Much life will wrap itself in death, misery, destruction, need. Hunger will break in over the whole Earth world, when from space a huge danger bellows close. Fires will race through countries and destroy forests. Many will kill those who in fear pray devout prayers. World waters will come rolling and drown much. Enormous storms will deadly plow around the world. Countries will sink in the deep floods of the seas. Countless lives will drown in the raging floods. Shipping and air travel will become makers of death. Seas, rivers, mountains will only harbor little life. Countless crimes, war and misfortune will rise. Murder and misery will plunge people into terror and suffering. These are the final signs of the evil coming time, which deadly due to the guilt of many people approaches. It is entirely the guilt of mankind alone, because he continues to prepare war, need, misery, and pain. Because he robs all earth treasures, metal and oil to gas, destroys all ores, all forests, all life down to the grass. Also all the crazy guilt of primitive atomic explosions, with which noble cities were destroyed in Japan's land regions. From now on the earth will no longer come to true rest, because man has taken too much from her treasures, exploited her, severely burned and wickedly robbed, built madly with houses, dams and reservoirs. So her balance inside was strongly destroyed. Therefore, from now on, volcanic fire, as well as roaring earthquakes sound. Man, all these events came from confused deeds, from your delusion, greed for power and your confused rush. You alone bear guilt for all now coming destruction, which you invoked through a madness striving. But you, Earthman, have severely disturbed our natural course. Never listen to her voice and to her warnings. Joy, peace, freedom, love should have been created on Earth, but only wars, disputes, hatred, revenge could arise from it. You have cruelly mistreated all good-natured Earth nature, have caused Earth pain, misery, need and hellish torture. Man, for that you will have to pay terribly fearful in the future, when death, destruction, need and misery greet you, as the Earth's response which you have very wickedly desecrated, which you pledged to evil in greed for power and madness. In Guatemala you were given a very bad sign, was flooded full of rubble mountains and human corpses. But you just stupidly mocked this Earth world sign. Joyfully and grinning you continued the Earth plundering. And a very bad sign came in Udine, in the Boo country, where destruction advanced on you in Black Death garb. Millions of Earth people were brought to death by you. You made life and existence into evil misery, but yet you have not become much wiser from it all. Never do you stop killing nature and the Earth world badly. You wrongly believe in madness to find consolation in a god, so you try even more to bind yourself to religious lies. Honor a fictional god, lying pope and religious fanatics. Thus despise nature and creation as a whole. Man of Earth, you bear the guilt of Earth events. If you had not paid attention to religion, you would have seen it. And if you had not been so greedy for money and power, you would have once read the ancient prophecies, which have long announced to you the signs of the future, brought by wise men who have proclaimed them so often. You, Earthman, have indulged in power and religion, and ordered misery, hate, lies and scorn to creation. Thus believed also the politics and sectarians their lies. You let yourself be exploited and deceived by them lifelong. Now, however, you will pay for it in very large measure, because now the door to destruction has been widely opened for you. The earth now takes revenge violently, rising up and loudly, because you have wrongly believed in religion, Pope, God and politics, through which you have slid into power and madness. Thus you have ridden yourself into need, misery and destruction. Nicely, you have already destroyed creation, nature, eradicated much in fauna, and flora extremely outrageously and irresponsibly bred humanity wildly. Since logic, reason and understanding have fled from you because the degeneration of lust and similar crimes, worse than bad whoredoms, starve into human minds. The earth is completely overflowed with overpopulation, and bad rulers want only power, money and was, torment all peoples with new laws and taxes, and constantly act for themselves for more power and money. And the enslaved humanity, will through its own stupidity lose its ever scarcer freedom due to its dullness, because the rulers will wield powerful guardianship when electronic artificial intelligence arises. Now has come the era of many signs of the times, when death and destruction rush terribly over the earth, because now begins the destruction of earth life, because all foundations of the tormented blue planet tremble, caused by the madness of mankind of this world, whose death screams now painfully ring everywhere forever. Man of the earth world, you have just wanted everything yourself, but the whole evil grey, violent destruction now rolls over you, because you never wanted to finally turn to the truth. But you always rushed only to lies, religion, and politics. Let yourself be driven by them to greed and lust for power, to grasp yourself in hatred, untruth, addiction, and murder lust. Through religion and politics you have been greatly exploited, are enslaved and become stupid, thoughtless hordes. Man, you shift your responsibility to a fictional God, according to the false teachings of all insane religious hoarding. But consider henceforth, man of earth, man of this world, when death and destruction reign everywhere on the planet, the responsibility for everything lies only with you alone, because you cannot ask a dear God about this. You alone are responsible, accountable for all events, because never will a God or Pope ever stand by your side. They are only there to cheat and exploit you wickedly, to wring your mind enslavement and madness to destruction. You yourself, Earthman of the blue Earth planet in the solar system, are closest to yourself in knowledge and right action, in law's approval. Therefore always orient yourself fully on the truth alone, otherwise even more misery, need and pain will come over you. You still can keep some coming bad things away, if you try now to act truthfully and rightly, but then you must move away from religions and politics, otherwise your bones will bleach in the sun's heat.
The last one here, from 1976, which you were still working through. Some things have really happened so far, but there will be more in the future. But I would like to elaborate on this one, this advance, a little more precisely, but I do not want to formulate it with you until later.
That is the case and will also be the case in the future. If you want to formulate it a little differently here, we can do that. But all the poems that I wrote while I was still at school, there are a few more than these, trigger bad memories in me, because I tried to get them published in newspapers. Unfortunately, I did not succeed, and the copies were also stolen from me at school, and at least the teacher Frey got hold of them, as well as various articles that Esther had stolen from my school desk and given to the teacher. All the poems were together, which I had been writing for years and which your grandfather Svath had photographed, so the Sectarian and Lout teacher had them all together. Again and again he caught me together with Horiton, because I could not just run off in the classroom. 3 times they caught me on the Voliburn, and once there were 4 more people from the sect who all beat me up miserably. And as you know, this sect tried to get rid of me all over the world, which has happened 27 times so far.
You can count 7 more attempts on top of that because
I do not know how many there were. I did not count them, but it came to what was thought in the process. I do not want to think about it, because it would not do any good, and besides, it was all a long time ago. However, the fact that human beings can be so fanatical about their faith, like the believers in the sect that some wanted to corner me even abroad in various countries, and are still trying to do so today, although I think that
this supposition has indeed.
I do not think we should talk any further about this topic. I received another quote from Occam today. All I can say is that it fully corresponds to what is effective.
Quote of the day.
Of course, the common people don't want war. But after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it's always easy to bring the people along, whether it's a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. That's very easy. All you have to do is tell the people they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and for exposing the country to danger. This method works in every country.
Hermann Göring, Nazi criminal source, the Site.net 1.7. 2025.
The truth is also that the people simply put up with everything their rulers do, regardless, and mindlessly accept everything those ineffectual and lazy elements of the government spout. Namely, those who, in fear, cowardice, and their inability to fulfill their office, are morbidly intelligent, selfish, and greedy for power, with horrendous remuneration at the expense of the people's tax money, promote nonsense and even discord, strife, and, in their fear and cowardice, war, destruction, and ruin. The state-run murderer organizations, that is to say the military, have to answer for this, in which the armies are set upon other peoples in a murderous manner, and this in turn is financed by the people's tax money, so that they have to pay high taxes for their own murder. But look here. Michael asked me about the 12 recommendations, for which I have interpreted the following, which I will read to you if you have the time to listen to me.
I'm not in a hurry for time.
Good, then hear what I have written, and for which perhaps this and that is required to complete it. But first listen to this, for which I think that it is necessary in and of itself to explain everything in more detail than is done, superficially by those worldwide experts, of religions and sects, etc. These recommendations, in their actual values, are humanly created guidelines, which are supposed to originate from a God, but which are completely natural and which exist universally in Earth humans, and also in various forms of different genera and species of human likeness. Thus, the following results from my point of view and my understanding, which is to be explained once in an understandable form.
Which I think you are very capable of doing, unlike those whom you call professionals, but who are clearly not capable and able to explain everything correctly, and also lack the necessary knowledge.
Basically, billions of human beings follow beliefs of various kinds. Just like the 10 billion or so Earthlings who, because of their delusional beliefs, consequently only have a false way of thinking and cultivate assumptions. But now listen to what has emerged from my answers to the questions about the 12 recommendations, starting with this. Fundamentally, it is first of all necessary to explain generally and thoroughly what creation is in all its values, as well as in the reason for its existence, as well as energy and power.
What creation is such is in and of itself. Checked for correctness. Svath Sunday, 6 February 1949. Eddie Meyer, Niederflachs 1253. Bullock expanded by authoritative important statements on 5 July 2025.
Creation is not a religiously conceived imaginary God, not a being of any kind, that tells or instructs human beings what to do or not to do, because it is human beings themselves, like every other life form, who decide, determine and decide, and act on their own actions. The creation itself is neither a great nor a small being that would somehow be human. Human-like, divine, determining, directing or guiding all events of all kinds, and would realize them effectively, or have them realized by human beings, etc. The creation is not a being of religion. Creation is not an essence of religion, a word that is etymologically highly controversial, and whose meaning is not clearly defined. Even in very ancient times, the word religio was used on the one hand to mean binding back, while on the other hand, the Latin word for religion is religare, which means to bind, or to tie. However, Marcus Tullius Cicero, the eldest son of a Roman knight, interpreted religare as to read something again, and also as to reconsider. Note, the name comes from the Latin term "cisa," which means chickpea. Cicero was the most famous orator in ancient Rome, as well as a lawyer, politician, philosopher and writer. He was also known as a climber and upstart because he was the first of his clan to hold the office of consul, and was therefore referred to as homo novus. which also means new human being. This was in the year 63 BC, when Cicero held the consulship. At the time, he was the highest magistrate of the Roman Republic, and also extremely powerful, which is why he was able to put down an attempted coup d'etat by the senator Lucius Sergius Catilina, who tried to seize the might of the Roman Republic through the conspiracy. Cicero was then honored by the Senate as the true father of the fatherland, for defeating the attempted coup. Creation is what nature and the universe as a whole is. That which exists as a whole and therefore exists, but not a fantasized imaginary existing being called God, which is to be worshipped and is also worshipped by believers. Creation should be recognized as existing nature and simply respected, appreciated, honored, cherished and cared for, with honor and dignity. But it is not that which is erroneously called God by delusional believers, and is worshipped and idolized as such a fantasy figure, who is adored, fanatically worshipped and reverently idolized by delusional believers, as the Son of God, as a result of blind fanatical believers, with lying and terrible fraudulent claims. Something that should not be, however, because in reality and truth, Emmanuel, as the man was really called, who is falsely and fancifully called Jesus by believing fanatics, was an earth human who brought and taught the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. He also taught that there is neither a God in heaven, nor a God, God Creator, or God the Father. And he taught that only human beings have the audacity to exalt themselves as God or gods. Just as only morbidly megalomaniac, power-hungry and insane human beings can set themselves up as rulers and other power-hungry people over nations. Many allow themselves to be celebrated and slavishly worshipped as gods, by the massively misguided and oppressed. Although in truth and reality, the worshipped human beings are of zero value as truthful human beings, but are extremely mendacious, deceitful and depraved elements. Let it be repeated once again, the creation is nature as a whole. The entire universe and therefore everything that exists in the entire universe, but not an imaginary and therefore non-existent being that is to be worshipped. Creation, as existing nature, should simply be respected, appreciated, honored, cherished, and cared for with honor and dignity. However, it is not what delusional believers in religions and sects, etc., erroneously call God and worship as such a fantasy figure. This, as in so-called Christianity, for example, where a human being called Jesus Christ is idolized and sanctified as the alleged Son of God, who, as a result of blindly fanatical and deluded believers with evil lying and bad fraudulent claims, is worshipped and reverently adored as the Son of God by many morbidly delusional believers. Something that should never be, however, because in reality and truth, Emmanuel, as the man was really called, who is falsely and fancifully called Jesus by fanatics of faith, was a normal human being on earth, who brought and taught the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. He also taught that there is neither a God in heaven, nor a God, God Creator, or God Father of earth. And he also taught that only human beings have the audacity to elevate themselves as gods or goddesses, as well as foreign travelers from afar who, out of pathological megalomania and greed for power and as madmen, set themselves up as rulers and other power-obsessed people. Many allowed themselves and still allow themselves to be celebrated and slavishly worshipped as a god by those who are massively misguided and oppressed by faith. Although in truth and reality, the worshipped are worthless as true human beings. And it should be said again and again, there is no heavenly God, God Creator or God Father, etc., because such a figure and thought hallucination corresponds in any case only to a completely worthless, imagined and fantasized figure, which is always invented by completely unreal and misguided human beings and worshipped in a delusion of faith, pleading and hoping. This also applies to other gods. That believers in religion and sects or other delusional believers in God stupidly worship a god or several gods and senselessly hope for help and blessings that they will never receive, unless the praying and pleading people help themselves, which they then attribute to their imaginary god in the bottomless roaring low intelligence of their delusional belief. Creation is neither commanding, demanding, nor begging, for truthfully creation is in reality and truth pure, autonomous, and independent nature, which allows everything to flourish and grow and become in its entire 7-universe space. This is given in a total of 7 different main dimensions in the same area of creation, whereby the Dan universe, as it is called by the Pleiadian from the ANKAR universe, is our universe, while the 6 other and differently dimensioned universes, which are all in the same creation space, but as explained, differently dimensioned and outside the area of our Dern universe, are called parallel universes by Svarth the Pleiadian in the 1940s. These parallel universes, which each have a dimension of their own, and thus do not affect the other universes of creation, not only contain the dimension of their present according to time, but logically also countless dimensions of the past and the future, which, if the living beings, physical or immaterial, belonging to the respective parallel universe have developed, the ability and possibility to travel back in time, or to the future, and thus to break through dimensions of the future or the past. If they are even capable of doing so, like the Pleiadian from the Ankar universe, then they are also able to break into and travel through the various dimensions of the future and past, or also the present of the parallel universes. And again, it bears repeating that creation is neither commanding, demanding, nor begging or otherwise demanding, challenging, burdensome, difficult, grueling, or laborious, arduous, or burdensome. Truthfully, it is in reality and truth comprehensively given in its existence, in all its 7 different main dimensions, in the same space, in the same direction, but separated by 7 different dimensions. The 6 other universes outside our Dern universe have been described by Svarth as parallel universes, from which it is possible to cross over from one parallel universe to another through rare natural or artificially created passage gates, insofar as life forms are technically able to do so. However, these parallel universes belong entirely to the 7-fold creation space realm, while further or other, and thus absolutely foreign, universes of other creations, that is to say, those that are not parallel universes of the creation space realm, can be broken through. If any life forms are capable of this, then they belong to another creation that has nothing to do with and is not connected to the one that is our creation. Through natural or artificially created passages, it is therefore possible to cross over into the parallel universes. Each universe is always divided into 7 energy belts, of which the middle belt in each universe is the honeycomb-shaped cosmos or material belt. The cosmos is completely renewed every 49 billion years by a strong invisible gravitational energy, which ensures that the cosmos and the material belt are held together. In this respect, in the center of each of the 7 other dimensional universes of creation, there is a cosmos or material belt, which is honeycombed and is constantly being changed by a completely invisible but all-encompassing strong gravitational energy and force, as this is given in 3 ways. Firstly, in the wise way mentioned, whereby the cosmos or material belt is held together by the completely invisible gravitational energy, which is present throughout the cosmos. It is necessary to explain that the wandering and invisible gravitational energy is given in such a way that it moves continuously through the honeycomb-shaped cosmos or material belt. How invisible gravitational energy holes are created in the star systems and galaxies, and also in space. How these huge invisible gravitational energy wanderers cause gigantic changes in the Milky Way and solar systems, etc., through their immense energies and forces, as well as through comets, meteors and asteroids, etc., which ultimately cause changes. This ultimately means that there is a constant change that alters and renews everything. Consequently, in the cosmos or in the material belt in each of the 7 universes, every cosmos or every material belt in each of the 7 universes of creation is renewed every 49 billion years. But there is also the third form of gravitational energy, which develops stationary, whereby this gravitational energy can create dark holes and attract and pull in space matter, asteroids, comets and planets, as well as small and large stars, or suns, whereby these can form in the middle of galaxies or move wildly through the respective cosmic space or the universe. They can form anywhere in space, which can ultimately give rise to something new again, when new solar formations and planets, etc., emerge from them. And this has been happening for trillions of years, ever since creation has come into existence through the work of the absolute absolutum, which also has to go through the same development as all other countless creations that exist in the endlessness of the infinite space of the infinity of Nihilo. This all happens completely naturally, and in the entire cosmos or matter belts of all 7 other dimensional universes of creation, nature, fauna and flora of all genera and species. That is to say, also all faunal and floral life in all cosmos and on all the life-bearing planets and moons of the 7 universes, continue to arise with their energy and power in an all-encompassing way. Everything is always and without exception myriad times brought to life when the viability of life is given on a planet or moon, etc., and then it also evolves, transforms, mutates, unfolds, thrives and takes effect, and allows everything to become, as it was created early on in primeval times, in a completely and emphatically neutral way, as well as predetermined by creation nature. Everything together in its myriad forms is completely incomprehensible to the human intelligentum, and also to the mind of human beings, no matter how highly, widely and knowledgeably developed it may be. So to repeat, all of this is completely natural, and in the entire cosmos or belts of matter, creation with its energy and power continues to produce nature, fauna and flora of all genera and species, and also all faunal and floral life on all the life-bearing planets and moons of the 7 universes. Everything is always, and without exception, myriad times brought to life when the viability of life exists on a planet or moon, and then it also evolves, transforms, mutates, unfolds and takes effect, and allows everything to become, as it was created and given early on in primeval times in a completely and emphatically neutral way. Everything together in its myriad forms is completely incomprehensible to the human intelligentum, and also to its mind, no matter how highly, widely and knowledgeably developed it may be. This, as well as everything else that exists in the entire cosmos, or the material belt, all suns, planets, asteroids, comets, stardust and the universe or outer space, in which electrons, neutrons and protons were fundamentally formed in the primordial soup, which developed over time and duration into ionized deuterium atoms and hydrogen atoms, etc., from which helium subsequently resulted through their fusion, etc. Before all this happened, there was only the nihilo, the nothingness, or the eternal and timeless, endless nothingness, before it emerged, which is inexplicable in human terms. That impulses from the nihilo resulted in a becoming or an existence of the absolutum forms, whereby a total of 7 absolutum forms or absolutum universes or absolutum levels emerge from it, which are to be described as follows: higher powers, gods, God, idols or so-called saints, conceived by human beings, can neither interfere in creation nor establish themselves in any other way, because such greatnesses or super greatnesses conceived by human beings would lack all energy and might, as well as all ability, to be able to do even one iota of the same as creation nature has been able to do since the primeval times of the sevenfold space of creation, still is and will be able to do until the distant future. With regard to the absolute forms mentioned, the following is to be explained. Absolutum forms, that is to say, absolutum universes, that is to say, absolutum creations, or absolutum levels, from the highest to the lowest. Sein absolutum, Zoa absolutum, Super absolutum, Creation absolutum, Central absolutum, Ur absolutum, Absolute. Absolutum from the absolute absolutum emerged as the lowest of all sevenfold forms of creation. The first 49 simple creations, which have all 7 belts, one of which corresponds to the material belt called the cosmos, which is generally known to human beings as the visible universe, with all its nebulae, comets, meteors, asteroids, suns, planets, moons, space and galaxies, etc., is known. However, the cosmos as a material belt corresponds only to the 7th part of the gigantic universe, because the other 6 belts, 3 on each side of the cosmos, consist of pure creation energy.
All that my grandfather taught you in this regard from Nocedemian's teachings, you could never have learnt that at school.
Of course not. And much of it could also not have been learnt at a college or university. But now I have something else that Michael asked me, namely about the 12 recommendations, which I mentioned, but for which it was necessary to explain a few things about creation first. But what I have to say about the 12 recommendations, of which there are many more, if these were observed, then there would really be no need for any state-imposed laws to keep order among human beings. Consequently, there would be no need for laws to keep order and the like, but only those that are relevant to criminal and criminal behavior, etc., and would therefore be punishable. Laws are also mentioned in the commandments. Consequently, these are not pure commandments, but effectively commandment laws, because everything is interwoven.
That is indeed the case, but about that I have.
It is not only you who have not, if I combine correctly what you wanted to say, namely that you have never thought about it. I guess Earthlings also have not done that since time immemorial, especially the religionists.
To which, however, now that you have said it, it will be universally claimed to be a lie that it was very well considered.
Never mind, because lying among religionists and the majority of Earthlings has long been a kind of passion, a passionate inclination, as is also the case with the media. But let us leave that, because now I want to move on to the recommendations and what I have to say next.
Questions about the 12 recommendations.
With regard to the given 12 recommendations, it should now be explained in more detail, in a responsible and brief way, what these recommendations actually contain as a whole, what they basically mean and what they are to be understood as, and how everything is really to be understood from them. 1. Thou shalt have no other gods. Goddesses, idols, or saints beside creation, for these were only far-traveled human beings who were erroneously worshipped by earth humans as gods, goddesses, and idols.
Fundamentally, human beings should only absorb, accept, and register, store in the memory of their consciousness as effective knowledge what they can actually see, hear, feel, and perceive clearly and consciously in terms of sensation, impulse, instinct, or in any other effective way. This also applies to his conscious creation in his world of thoughts, in his feelings and sensations, as well as completely in all his effective perceptions in his entire physical realm, because only the real and thus reality itself is what is creational and thus natural, correct, and true. Every kind and form of belief, whatever kind it may also be, can never be consulted, for such a belief is never provable, but only reality and its truth. In this respect, therefore, only creation as nature with its energy and power is provable in all that exists in the universe and can be consciously recognized and proven as effective reality and as its truth, and can also be truly understood through understanding and reason. Creation as nature is therefore also physically tangible, palpable, and can also be perceived in terms of impulses and feelings. It can and should therefore also be treated with dignity and honor, not only in the form of contemplation and admiration, but also in the wise way in which it is protected and given careful care and attention. Creation, the true nature of everything that exists and of all the energy and power contained and at work in it at all times, through which everything and anything from the very largest to the most insignificant of tiny things is animated and can lead its existence, has no equal. Never and never could any being equal it, neither other might, gods, idols, or saints. No being has ever existed, and no being will ever exist that could in any wise equal creation with even the tiniest iota of creation nature. Even all the primitive endeavors of earth humans or other living beings in all universes throughout creation space will never be able to affect the work of creation with even the tiniest iota. What human beings or other consciously capable and thus developed beings of any genus, species, and form try to bungle an imitation of creation are, since time immemorial as well as at present and until the end of all time and existence, only miserable botched attempts through which they can never also achieve the work of creation nature in even the tiniest iota. This because the energy and power of creation nature can never be fathomed and also never be reproduced or imitated, no matter how great the endeavors and grandiose the attempts. Therefore, no human beings or higher beings should appear and megalomaniacally seek to elevate themselves above creation nature, for they will never also reach the absolute natural energy and power, as well as its work, even in Jodasize. And since human beings or other beings are not capable of this either, human beings should not have or tolerate any fantasized might. A god or gods, idols, and saints, etc., next to creation, for these fantasy beings invented by human beings are in no wise what they are imagined to be and are devoid of energy, power, and nonsense. It is creation alone, with its energy and power, that animates everything and everyone, all matter, all fauna and flora, everything visible and invisible, everything tangible and intangible, everything visible, invisible, audible, inaudible, but also everything that is physically tangible and intangible, as well as everything that is sentient and insentient. Creation is the existence of everything that exists, from the smallest and tiniest to the mightiest and most powerful. And it is called creation nature because everything and everything has always emerged from it. Because everything and everything emerges from it, and everything will also emerge from it, exist and be animated by its energy and power in the future. It alone embodies, to put it mildly and simply, as nature all that exists in its sevenfold and different dimension, as well as gigantic and immeasurable universe realms, as the nature of all things and the existence of all that exists. Apart from creation as such, there is neither energy and power nor anything else that would be equal to it, neither by human beings nor by might conceived through their imagination, reverie, or illusions, nor by any conceived God, nor gods, dumb morning, idols or saints, who would also only have the tininess of zero energy and power in the slightest wise, would be able to work in the same way, which only creation as such, with its energy and power, can bring into being and bring about what it alone is predestined to do. In this wise, it is of an all-universal uniform nature. Consequently, there is no second in its entire sevenfold space, also no third or fourth. For in the sevenfold space of creation, there is no nuance of difference in the nature of creation. There is only a difference in the way that, in one area of a world, the fauna and flora and matter thrive and flourish in their own way. But in another area, the plants thrive and flourish in their own way. Just as from one area to another, the life forms, depending on their genus and species, and therefore the fauna and flora as well as the matter, are different and therefore fundamentally different. Thus, the nature of creation remains universally the same and unchangeable throughout the entire space of all seven universes in all dimensions of creation.
2. The human being shall hold creation in honor and dignity, neither abusing nor harming it, nor desecrating nor disrespecting it.
Creation is nature and the existence of everything and everyone that exists as a whole in the manifold universal space. The whole has no sense of a religion and is therefore not orientated towards any belief, but towards the comprehensive existence of nature and its entire fauna and flora, and also towards the entire universe and the space dust, including all the tiniest forms of life existing in it, such as its material belt or the cosmos with all solar stars, asteroids, gases, comets, meteors, nebulae, and planets. This entirety is not to be touched in the sense that it is neither abused nor harmed, and also never desecrated, but respected and treated as good. Everything in creation should also be kept pure and clean at all times, effectively honest and truly in honor and dignity.
3. The human being should reflect on creation every day and observe its existence and activity as if it were a holiday and refrain from anything negative in gratitude for his ability to exist in and through it. The human being should control his actions, speech, behavior, and deeds every day, and shape everything and everything correctly, and make it honorable, sublime, and dignified, so that it appears solemn.
The human being should keep everything and every one of his thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions pure every day, and also lead his life in a truly honest and free, controlling manner, thereby shaping it into a living holiday. Life should be orientated towards peace and freedom in a constantly controlling manner, just as creation dictates in its nature, so that nothing wrong or contrary to life and nothing negative is cherished in thought and nothing of the kind is also acted upon. We should not think and act against the positive, but always only within the framework of the positive and righteous, not against the positive, regular, good and correct. The human being should constantly honor, appreciate and keep clean the positive truth according to the real and the effective truth, and thus do nothing wrong and do what? According to the judgment of the correct is given by the all-encompassing creation. The human being should always keep everything he speaks, acts ceremony, does in his entire behavior of every kind, in form pure and honorable, thus also in peace, freedom, love, and in all values of the good, positive and constantly oriented towards the contemplative, and consequently let his entire attitude be determined by calmness and gentle attention. The human being should therefore indulge in insight meditation and utilize the insights gained from it in daily life and existence, so that he does not oppose what is right, regular and specifically correct, and follows what is given by creation or nature, and is not wrong, and can be realized at his own discretion with his own energy and strength.
The human being should not break the covenant of communion with creation, which is an inseparable bond of duty and right between it and human beings.
The recommendation is based on the fact that there is an indestructible connection between creation and human beings. All fauna and flora and all existing visible and invisible life, because creation is the existence and the energy and power of all that exists and thus of the energy of creation in general. It is therefore comprehensively nature. Its fauna and flora, all matter of every kind, just as it is also the existence and the existence of the cosmos in its very own energy and power of its manifold universe space. In this way, creation is the connecting pole of all being and non-being, as is also the connection between it and every life form existing in it. Whether it moves independently or is bound to a place, flies, flutters, runs, crawls, wins, swims, creeps, bores through the earth, trees, plants, etc., or digs and burrows through the ground. What creation provides and inevitably connects everything with it and its existence is all and everything of its energy and power, and therefore life, or simply everything that creeps and crawls. The human being is first and foremost a part of this, and everything that is of its kind or similar, endowed with an evolutionary consciousness. Accordingly, creation and human beings together have a relationship of the closest and lifelong bond, whereby this is called marriage in the sense of human beings, which literally means community of life. But this is fundamentally a connecting state of creation with everything that has been created, exists, and has become effectively existent through it. That is to say, a direct connection that should actually be called a bond. In other words, nature, as well as everything else that is visible or invisible, tangible and intangible, and sentient and insentient that has come into existence. So all this is nature and all its fauna and flora, as well as everything that exists. Everything was already given from the ground up as an all-encompassing connection for everything and anything. So first of all, hermaphroditism for creation itself, this as its form of its great energy and power of evolution, which it fundamentally integrated into all its creations or into all its objects of the entire fauna and flora. The faunal life forms, mainly human beings, animals and creatures, etc., were thus created in a very specific way as hermaphrodites, specifically as female and male beings, who consequently exist with ovarian tissue and also with testicular tissue in equal or opposite gonads. The external genitalia as well as the internal duct structures naturally show differences between male and female. The actual genital tissues generally manifest themselves in all but about 8 to 10% of the various life forms in groups with a bisexual interpretation, which means that hermaphrodites or bisexual beings can also develop from them. The human being, animal or creature can also be intersexed, such as human beings, animals and creatures with variations in sexual characteristics and sexual development or intersexuality, etc. According to what has been explained, the human being has naturally complied with hermaphroditism at an early stage of his creation or incarnation, and has united and joined together as a male and female being, thereby complying with the creation requirement of evolution and further development as well as reproduction. So he has consummated a marriage, which is a hermaphroditically predetermined union between a woman and a man, which was made by human beings into what is nowadays usually legally recognized as a marriage between two sexually different persons, that is to say, between a man and a woman, but which can also be possible, for example, between two homosexual men or lesbian women. Being connected in this way is a natural right that is not only reserved for human beings, but also for all fauna and flora, and therefore all animals and creatures, as well as all life forms in general. The law of creation given by natural law should not be broken or disregarded. This should be justified and recognized for human beings. Social law and against all false and forbidding religious teachings in this regard, Also, when it is usually religiously, officially, and ritually or legally regulated and takes place with ceremonies. The marriage union or concubinage, two persons of different sexes living together without being married and not having a registered partnership, but a marriage-like cohabitation, is unfortunately not legally recognized as equivalent to official marriage due to ignorance of the created nature of the natural union, which is fundamentally and naturally predetermined by creation, is a legally and socially recognized cohabitation of two persons, which is intended to be permanent, is a voluntary union, and is characterized by certain rights and obligations, and should neither be disregarded nor broken. Bearing in mind that every such union is predetermined by creation in this way, but cannot be regulated again in the event of Ausertung and is rendered unviable. For human beings, this means that if a marriage no longer works, for whatever reason, it can and should be divorced. In other words, a marriage should not be broken willfully because it is not only a personal decision, but is also creational, even if it is recognized by law, state, and society. Marriage is a voluntary cohabitation based on a voluntary decision by both partners to live a life together that is designed to last a long time, in accordance with the creational bond, meaning that it should not simply be broken on a whim, but only when there is a real need for it. The human being's marriage bond with creation is lifelong, and the marriage bond establishes certain rights and duties between the spouses, which are, for example, the right to mutual assistance and the duty of mutual consideration, as well as also the equal rights and duties of both partners.
Note: Wikipedia, etymology. The word marriage comes from the Old High German oa, meaning law or provision. Wedding, also called marriage or nuptials, refers to the Old Germanic word herat, which means household provision or marriage.
5. The human being should show respect, honor, and appreciation to creation, which is nature and everything that exists in energy and power throughout the universe, and strive to nurture and care for it, just as he should respect, honor, and appreciate all life and its parents.
The human being should show dignity and honor to creation, to nature, keep it in order, and thus cherish and care for it, because it is, together with all its fauna and flora and other existing things, the basis of all life and thus of all existence. Through the existence of creation or nature alone, through its all-encompassing energy and power, the life of all fauna and flora, all its countless genera and species, all matter of every kind, all waters, planets, asteroids, comets, outer space, and the entire cosmos and universe is possible. In accordance with the guidelines of creation or nature, which sustains all life in existence and is infinite in its myriad species, aspects, facets, genera, and forms, etc., for the still deficient human understanding, the human being should show due respect, honor, and dignity to everything. At the same time, he should give everything good care and nurture and offer everything such protection that it remains undamaged and protected from all dangers caused by human beings, from all decay, and also from every unnatural offense of human being.
6. The human being shall not kill his own kind, as in any Ausertung genera or species of animals, creatures, or other life forms.
The human being shall not kill his own kind, for in many cases this is nothing other than murder. That is to say, any deliberate killing of human beings, regardless of the kind and wise, also regardless of how courts and human beings alone judge, and name each murder differently. And murder is the deliberate killing of human beings in any way, especially killing through war, as well as through terror, jealousy, and lust, hatred, punishment, torment, son, execution, sexual degeneracy, torture, manslaughter, greed, nanpito, contempt for human beings, etc. with regard to the killing of human lives, The range is wide and varied, so only the most important forms of killing should be mentioned, which are judged differently by the courts in terms of their manner and background. Some of them are listed here that only apply to human beings, such as negligence killing, thrill killing, pedophilia killing, greed killing, premeditation killing, cruelty killing, fear killing, insidious killing, vision killing, execution killing, concealment killing, wanton killing, affect killing, serial killing, rage killing, quarrel killing, addiction killing, pity killing, anger killing, confusion killing, desire killing, satisfaction killing, insensitivity killing, mistrust killing, revenge killing, possession killing, suicide killing, retaliation killing, pregnancy killing, torture killing, etc. The killing of human beings by their own kind corresponds to a malignant Ausartung and is in no wise something that creation prescribes, but something that corresponds to a malignity, as has been handed down since time immemorial. This has been the case for 9 billion years. When Nakademion in the ANKAR parallel universe announced the human being's behavioral teachings, which were also brought, taught, and disseminated in our DERN universe. Even in our times, human beings were taught thou shalt not kill, and not in Ausartung, which is to be understood as meaning that human beings should not consciously kill their own kind, which in every case, without exception, is nothing other than what corresponds to the term murder, which means that a human being is consciously deprived of his life and killed, which corresponds to Ausartung. If we get to the bottom of the origin of the term murder, we find Germanic roots in the term murtha, as well as in the Indo-European mer atur, which is said to have meant to die. By nature, according to creation, human beings are not allowed to kill their own kind, but only if they are fully aware of their responsibility to kill animals, creatures, and other life forms for effective food purposes. In doing so, full responsibility is to be exercised, and it is to be observed that absolutely every wise of cruelty to animals must be excluded and should never be practiced. Furthermore, this killing should be carried out with moderation and purpose, and consequently also not be practiced for meat. It should only ever be carried out as a result of the need to kill a lower life form. If this becomes necessary, and if such a life form is to be killed, if the necessity makes it necessary to use the meat as food. To kill a human being is in any case, and without exception in Ausartung, because he is a completely consciously thinking, and in this way a consciously evolving being, which clearly has within itself a creation energetic as well as an evolutionary capable. Creation life energetic with a fully conscious consciousness and subconscious, and knows that it should not kill its own kind. The human being is such a being that, in addition to the creation, life energetic consciousness, also has a physical consciousness and subconscious. While the lower life forms only have a semi-conscious consciousness or others, for example, an instinct life, impulse life, etc. Consequently, it is not given to these kinds of living beings that they can think and evolve consciously, and also not according to reason, which means that killing, harming, or injuring their own kind, as well as other kinds of life, is usually inherent to them. Humanly, in the rarest case of self-defense, it can happen unintentionally under certain circumstances that harm, injury, or death is caused, which is then generally to be considered an act of self-defense and should not be punishable, just as any unintentional killing in this respect. Consequently, if it is then to be judged, it should be considered unintentional and exempt from punishment. This tertiary Yamayuan, however, just as otherwise and contrary, every intentional killing of a human being is murder, every killing without forethought and justification, but out of recklessness, no matter how, where, and when, is to be judged and punished as reckless killing.
7. The human being shall not rob or take away any property without authorization, shall not steal, shall not expropriate, and shall not enrich himself by thievery.
The human being shall not deprive another human being or any other third party of anything by robbery, theft, violence, murder, fraud, deception, or lies, etc. This applies to anything and everything. This applies to anything and everything that is the property of others, including their personal and material possessions, money and valuables. That is to say, jewelry and the like, or anything that is in the care and custody of a person. This therefore applies to everything that concerns the property of other persons, whether this is private property or whether it is in the custody and custody of a person, bank, group, community, association, or society. However, it is not enough for robbery and expropriation to refer only to material values, for it is just as reprehensible and unjust to rob an animal, bird, dog, lizard, rabbit, chicken, goose, or any other living creature of any species or kind. Equally, it also includes the theft of human beings, for whatever purpose, be it for prostitution, slavery, or kidnapping for the extortion of money or goods, etc. Robbery is also carried out in such a way that the planet's resources are not plundered excessively for the sake of profit, thereby destroying its inner joints. But if this is done, it will have unpleasant and evil consequences and effects that not only jeopardize all life on the planet, but even its existence. And this is something that is denied by the scientists in charge, because in their low intelligence, they either do not know this or are hiding it as a result of money grubbing. All predation is also not right in the sense that Earth humans are destroying everything as a result of overpopulation and its excessive needs and the negative machinations resulting from this. This applies to nature and also to the wild animal world as well as the other living world of all species of fauna and flora, and that it robs them of their habitat. The human being is doing this by increasingly constricting the habitat and disfiguring and obstructing it with houses, factories, sports grounds, railway lines, motorways, other roads, and many other things. This is just as water bodies, rivers, lakes, streams, rivulets of all kinds and seas should not be robbed of their normal space, because this is also the space for all aquatic life, which loses its habitat through the robbery of water, which is also poisoned by human beings and filled with rubbish, whereby slowly but surely the aquatic life forms of all genera and species are dying out, as is also happening in the forests, mountains, meadows and pastures, and in the soil.
8. The human being shall not deceive and lie against the effective reality and truth of creation and all life existing through its energy and power, of every genus and species, of every matter and otherwise.
And species, all matter and everything else visible and invisible in the entire universe. The human being should always think, speak, and act according to reality and truth. Consequently, he should also never think or speak unreal things, just as he should only act correctly, so that he does not thereby cause any harm, suffering, misery, enmity, strife, murder, destruction, or other misfortune of any kind, or even war. Throughout Recollections, reality should always be seen and its truth recognized. And this should also be represented as knowledge and defended in a peaceful manner, as well as spread openly and honestly to the outside world in order to set an example so that other human beings can also benefit from it and learn to find reality in its truth. The human being should therefore also lead his thoughts, actions, and life in accordance with reality and its truth, from which he is able to recognize that the reality and its truth of creation is the energy and power of all that exists in universal nature in a wise and unseen way, and not in any way a god, a higher might, or the like. The reality and its truth about creation and its energy and power, as well as all life of every kind and wise, that arises and comes forth through it should be represented and not be fraudulently and mendaciously slandered by deceit and lies, or by a belief that is in any case absolutely unprovable, and by illusions and fantasies. Only reality and its truth should ever be represented, for they belong together eternally because they are inseparable and also signify true life. And accordingly, earth humans and everything that belongs to the human-like or human-like should also act in thought and deed in such a way as is effectively correct and must be. Consequently, reality and its truth, and thus creation, should not be abused or attempted to be altered in any wise, etc., for anything directed against it never brings success, but only damage and devolution. Consequently, only that which is natural or creational can bring success and be evolutionary, while everything and anything that is directed against and creates the natural or creational only brings death, destruction, and ruin. Note comparison. Nuclear fission equals atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with hundreds of thousands of human beings dead, in addition to the enormous destruction and atomic radiation, etc. Such things were not intended by creation, and only find a complete Ausartung through human beings. The human being should not and never change and abuse the good, all-encompassing peacefulness of creation, because every abuse or attempt at change that the human being undertakes against creation, that is to say, against the all-encompassing nature and its energy and power, brings some kind of Ausartung and damage, which should actually have been known from time immemorial. Nevertheless, he acts contrary to all knowledge, understanding, and reason, for which not only he, but also the planet, nature and its waters, forests, mountains, meadows, marshes, and floodplains, etc., as well as the entire fauna and flora, suffer immeasurable damage and often fall victim to extinction. But the human being, in his ever-increasing delusion of self-importance, indifference, and irresponsibility, does not think about this, as a result of which he has bred a planetary overcrowding of humanity, an overpopulation that is destroying the planet, the entire creation with all life and everything else that goes with it. He has sunk so low in his understanding and reason that he is no longer able to realize reality and its truth. Consequently, he destroys all the foundations of life, and in his low intelligence and simple-mindedness does not realize that he fundamentally violates every order of creation and violently calls into question any continuation of any form of life on planet Earth and its very existence.
9. The human being should always remain with reality and its truth. Consequently, he should not speak untruth and not conjure up evil, disaster, misunderstanding, and wrong action, death and destruction through lies.
The human being should not speak the great evil of lies and other untruths, but should always cultivate the truth according to reality. Lies of all kinds quickly lead to a habit, whereby the human being becomes more and more deceitful and falls more and more into dishonesty, which extends not only to lies, but also to behavior and dishonesty in general. Lies are not only used to disguise and conceal reality and its truth, but also to deliberately misrepresent it. Because a lie is a false and untrue statement that is deliberately and consciously presented as the truth in order to deceive or generally even manipulate someone. Lies can be based on 1,000 different motives, such as lies for gain, lies to deceive, lies for fear of punishment or otherwise lies to avoid consequences, lies to gain advantages, lies to distract from unpleasant things, lies to deliberately deceive, lies to deny guilt, lies to deny knowledge, lies to mislead, lies for the purpose of manipulation, lies for self-protection, lies to harm others, lies of distressed necessity, lies about feelings, lies to protect oneself, also lies to destroy trust and lies to destroy relationships, lies to create conflict, lies to avoid harm, etc. Lies are made with full intent, whereby the intention behind them is always to deceive others. The human being who tells a lie is a liar and knows that he is saying, or writing, if lying is done in writing, something untrue. Consequently, a lie is something completely different from when a human being is mistaken. Because when someone is mistaken, they truthfully do not know that what they are saying does not correspond to reality or its truth. A lie, seen from a truthful point of view, corresponds to a conscious and therefore deliberately untruthful representation of something that is not true, but which is presented as truthful in order to gain the acknowledgement and consent of the person on the receiving end of the lie and to deceive them. Human beings who lie usually invent something for their benefit, twisting the truth to speak an untruth. They deliberately deviate from the truth when they lie and say or tell something that corresponds to a lie. And passionate liars, both male and female, who brazenly tell lies, also tell them uninhibitedly when they know that their listener will recognize the lie immediately. So in any case, a lie is always and without exception a statement that human beings make fully consciously and with a certain justification, and which is labeled as a fistful, mean, smooth, coarse, vile, or sophisticated lie, depending on the circumstances. The human being should speak truths in accordance with reality. Then everything to be said should be said as clearly as it also corresponds to reality and its truth. The human being should never consciously dare to distort the truth in a lying manner, because this leads to quarrels, strife, misunderstandings, hatred, murder and manslaughter, discord, and even war. The human being who accepts and understands something correctly, but misrepresents it due to a lack of the necessary means of expression, and therefore expresses it incorrectly, is not lying, but merely the inability to explain something clearly. Therefore, human beings should always endeavor to explain everything in anything in an understandable way so that the human being understands everything correctly, whereby it may also be necessary under certain circumstances to discuss and inquire about the matter in question in such detail until the facts are clear and no misunderstandings remain.
10. The human being should not indulge in covetousness, and should not covet his neighbor's possessions, goods, or treasures.
The human being should not be covetous and should not covet his neighbor's possessions and goods, nor should he also covet his neighbor's treasures and other possessions. For all that is his neighbor's property should be untouchable and safe from foreign hands and remain as his possession. It is all his acquired and earned property, money and his belongings, his wealth and possessions, and should also remain so. For him it is positive, beautiful, super, great, advantageous, and impeccable, and this must also be accepted and respected. The human being's property is his possessions and goods, which means that everything that belongs to him is considered his property. It includes both material things, possessions, and goods, and immaterial values that belong to a human being, his prosperity, and thus the sustained state of which generally forms his prosperity in all areas of life, which also represents his holistic approach to his fulfilled life, which gives him thoughts and feelings of happiness and contentment or doing well. The property acquired honestly and through labor testifies to the prosperity and industriousness of human beings, as well as to the prosperity and well-being and a certain economic boom or overall increase in the development trend of a well-managed house, which proves that it is not shrinking and not stagnating and therefore not impoverished. Exactly the opposite would happen, however, if the goods, treasures, and other possessions and property of the unjust were coveted and stolen. But this should be refrained from, because it is not for any human being to covetously enrich himself by stealing the possessions and goods of another human being, because he simply wants to enrich himself. is shy of work and therefore cannot afford the same possessions and goods, or because he simply wants to make his way through life thieving and stealing or whatever. However, a human being should never, for whatever reasons, which always remain flimsy and never have any justification anyway, dare to covet his neighbor's possessions, property and possessions, because in any case this is already wrong, not only when it is stolen or stolen, it is also always a morbidly lowly, intelligent, and mistaken belief that stolen goods will bring joy, happiness, and blessings, because the exact opposite is the case. Nothing can protect you from a guilty conscience when it comes to theft, nor can it protect you from falling into the hands of some Hermandad or being caught by the police and put behind bars. The desire for foreign possessions and goods is nothing more than a lowly, intelligent, and simple-minded conceit of a human being's illusory thinking that he is perfectly happy and satisfied with something stolen, because if he succeeds in stealing, his desire and covetousness grows all the more, because the successful theft encourages him to repeat it and to steal more and more, so that he covets, desires, and steals again and again. And this continues until there is a crash and the police put a stop to the theft addiction. To covet something to the point of stealing it is not only wrong, because human beings should always think in every respect that their neighbor had to work for everything and anything they own, and that they alone are responsible for their possession. But if another human being sees something in someone else and wants to possess it, then he has to work for it himself and buy something similar in order to come into possession of what he desires. Consequently, everything is done rightly and honestly, and there is also no grudging, no theft, no enmity, and no quarreling. This also prevents theft or any other kind of theft, as well as anything that could lead to acts of violence, murder, or manslaughter.
11. The human being should always be worthy and honorable of the truth according to reality, neither denigrating it nor cursing it. That is, not being angry or wrathful, and also not acting against it with anger and mischief.
The human being should always know and also recognize what the truth actually is according to reality, whereby the concept of truth has a deep and multi-layered meaning that goes far beyond any mere correspondence with real facts and circumstances. Truth is very closely connected with the essence of reality, but also with the views, opinions, and ideas of human beings, with their thoughts, statements, and actions. Truth often also means sincerity and therefore honesty to the human being, as well as faithfulness and reliability. So a very specific human beings with whom a relationship of love exists, as also with other human beings with whom a closer connection is otherwise given, as also with human beings who live according to a special will or system, etc., which was decided together. In these wise, truth in this sense does not mean that a statement corresponds to reality, but the human being simply relies on the fact that what has been decided will be honored. In this way, the continuity of what has been decided and what has been decided is simply regarded as faithfulness, which in other words simply corresponds to reality in such a way that the statement of the promise made is kept and therefore corresponds to it. On the whole, what human beings determine as the truth is found to be higher than all the knowledge of human beings. However truthful it may also correspond to reality, and however truthful it may be. However, the effective truth always refers to reality, which is effectively the truth itself and therefore true, also when human beings do not want to understand it. Furthermore, truth includes that which is known to human beings either through creation and its nature, as well as its fauna and flora, and all matter. For this truth is based on the reality of everything that exists in creation, and is not merely that which is recorded as the teaching of everything known, but must be fully consciously absorbed into the human being's consciousness. But if the human being does not do this, then the judgment of not understanding comes upon him, namely the judgment of not understanding the truth, as a result of which he does not see the truth of reality and does not recognize it. Consequently, he turns to lies by faith and believes that in faith he finds the love of truth and allows himself to be misled and thereby believes that he will be saved. Therefore, he cannot accept the love of truth and does not realize that the truth that emerges from reality is also the real freedom from which the true truth effectively emanates and makes free. Reality and truth cannot and never can be separated, for reality and its truth are life. This is objectively and therefore actually and subjectively such that the human being is dependent on the reality and its truth of creation nature. This is indeed the truth, which unfortunately is not accepted by human beings with regard to their belief in religion and sex, as a result of which they twist and deceive everything through their faith. He turns away from everything that is effectively real and truthful. Consequently, he twists everything and turns it into a lie and a curse.
12. The human being should be careful not to place the order of creation nature in unworthy cults, whereby the order of creation is to be understood as recommendations that are to be obeyed, and thereby maintain their natural order, and human beings are to conform to it.
The human being should live according to the order of creation nature and rule according to it. He should not abuse this order, but respect it with dignity and honor and observe and fulfill it to the best of his ability. The reality and its truth, which is anchored in this order, ensures that all life can eke out its existence. But this also means that if this order is violated and not observed, damage will inevitably occur, causing misery and hardship. Non-compliance with the creational order, whether through words of lies or through deeds and actions, etc., brings about disaster, destruction, evil interference, and the destruction of nature, as well as the extinction of fauna and flora. And if we work, labor, and act against the order of creation, then very quickly, or also in the longer term, life-hostile evils appear, which lead to the complete destruction of this and that, and to abnormal and destructive things. This has been the case ever since creation nature and its order gave rise to and became life by the billions. But the majority of humanity completely disregards everything, completely misinterprets and believes instead of knowing. As a result, he falsely follows an erroneous belief in a false way of thinking, instead of allowing reality and its truth to enter into him in order to follow all the good order of creation and thereby lead a truthful life and, accordingly, a proper existence. Order is an observed, very positive state, a certain orderliness. That is to say, an orderly and well-organized state that prevents anything from causing disadvantage, harm, damage, destruction, or disaster, etc. Order is therefore also a component of a certain agreement to organize everything rightly, so that no disadvantages should arise. The human being can keep an order in a good intended sequence, systematize it in a certain abstract context or according to certain points of view, considerations, ideas, or the like, and also summarize and arrange it clearly, for example, also with regard to his thoughts. The human being is then able to bring something back into order and thus back into an orderly state that has become disordered. This restores an appropriate or necessary order in the correct wise. The human being's material order is contrasted with the creational order, which is to be interpreted in such a wise way that the idea of creation is at the core of the order, namely that the order, not in the sense of the human being a static arrangement of things, is protected by a creative process, which is a regular development and flourishing as well as an effective becoming. This implies that the order of creation is not only predetermined, but is a nature-controlled active design. Consequently, innovations also take place, and the creation of new structures can be brought forth. As a result, Processes take place that result from the application of new naturally occurring changes. The emergence of mutations and the emergence of new genera and species in fauna and flora, or the establishment of successful ideas in the realm of human beings' consciousness, which makes them geniuses or inventors in technology or in some other matter, for example, or brings them to the cutting edge of knowledge and understanding. The order of innovation in creation is a natural process of change towards something new. Something first in fauna and flora, as a result of which something new is implied or comes about and emerges in a purely natural way. The order of creation actually began with the emergence of light in the darkness of the cosmos and order in all its chaos. Light and order are essential features of reality and its truth, a work of creation which, in all its complexity and beauty, reveals the immense energy and power of order, unimaginable to human beings, which is always visible in nature, in all life and everything that exists and can be perceived, and also in its truth, as well as in all works of creation. Human beings have always been able to see and experience the balanced, peaceful might and greatness of creation and perceive its irrevocable order, if only they keep their senses and eyes open and do not close them to reality and its truth. However, if they continue to follow from the ground up a false, deceitful, erroneous and confused belief in a fantasized imaginary God, and do not cultivate their own thoughts independently, but continue to indulge in their illusory thinking as a result of their lying and deceitful belief, they will never see, recognize, and experience reality and its truth, but will remain slaves to lies and deceit. The human being is created by the eternal and everlasting order of creation and is a part of its unbreakable order. Therefore, he should be a partner of order for the permanent maintenance of its order and never place it himself in unworthy cults or even try to integrate it into such. And this should be a lifelong recommendation for human beings, which they should obey and thereby not only see reality and its truth, but also live it. In explanation according to the ancient teaching of Nakademion from the Ankar universe, the recommendations described in detail in the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life are given as these were brought to earth and taught by early heralds, but were maliciously shortened to a minimum and also falsified by later self-appointed recorders of the teaching. The following 12 moral recommendations, which are now available and given in detail for human beings on earth, are the most important and are given in accordance with what is to be explained in detail at the present time.
Connection to the given recommendations.
Faith means a confusion of chaos, of fear and darkness, of truth, of lies and deceit, of confusion and destruction. Faith includes enmity, war, death, and murder through hostility to religion, as the Hitler War proved. And through the program of faith, superstitions of many different kinds have also been evident since time immemorial, such as devil cults, witch hunts, witch burnings, and other witch executions, as is still common in certain African countries and in India, etc. But other evil and wicked religious cults also claim human lives in cruel ways, with torture leading to death, as was common in religious wars in earlier times. And the characteristics of religions and their beliefs and programs have not only left their mark on all Earth humans over the centuries, but have also been preserved for humanity to remember through written traditions. The connection to the horrors of religious faith is still made today by seeing and hearing what Hitler's World War brought upon Earth humans, whereby Judaism in particular was to be exterminated, and this caused the death of many millions of human lives. But that was not enough, because the persecution of religion in the Gaza region and in the Middle East was continued by the Israeli mass murderer and his army murder organization, because just as in Hitler's World War, the whole thing is nothing other than a murderous religious war by the Jewish mass murderer Netanyahu, who is waging a genocidal war against the Arabs who believe in Islam in the Gaza region, in Lebanon, in Persia, and partly also in Syria, and finally now also in Yemen. Consequently, as far as faith in religious form is concerned,
and as has been the case since time immemorial through war, murder, and manslaughter, bringing misery, and also destruction. This humanity's stultifying achievement continues to rage en masse, so that this absolutely devastating death virus clings to Earth humans to this day. The last World War, which Adolf Hitler staged and which claimed well over 70 million human lives, and only served to exterminate the Jews, which was basically a religious war, is now being repeated by order of the Israeli mass murderer and his military, for which America is also supplying large quantities of weapons to Zelensky, the Jewish president of Ukraine. In this regard, it seems that in this criminal way, reparations are to be made to the Jewish people for the murders committed during Hitler's World War, which the majority of the Jewish people in Israel and in the world do not want. However, the whole thing leads to the Jews being hated and harassed again, even though they want nothing to do with the actions of the mass murderer Netanyahu and his murderous army, but their anti-war voices go unheard. It was the same at the time when Emmanuel was supposedly nailed to a cross, because it was in fact only the top brass, all of the high religious elite, who were effectively the culprits, as they are also now in the hangers-on of the mass murderer and his army. But I think that the time has come to say what really happened when Emmanuel was to be executed. As I have mentioned before, it was not a cross that he was tied and nailed to, because this tale of the cross only came about 300 years after the events in Jerusalem. Emmanuel was tied to a Y-shaped execution stake, if I may say so, and nailed with 4 nails through the hands and heels of the feet. The execution stake was a Y-shaped olive tree trunk only about 3.5 meters long, to which Emmanuel was tied and additionally nailed in order to die a slow and agonizing death from the very bad torture wounds he had suffered, and as a result of dehydration through thirst. The trunk was supported from behind with 2 further pieces of trunk driven diagonally into the ground to give the Y-shaped execution trunk upright support. The whole execution procedure was not somehow recorded in writing, as it was not until more than 100 years later that a scribe imaginatively wrote down a tradition, after which numerous rewrites were also made over the decades, and the names of former disciples who truly had no knowledge of writing were given as authors. This is how mendacious Christianity came into being, as well as its sects and horrendous superstitions, such as witchcraft and religious wars, etc., which has claimed many millions of human lives over the course of around 2027 years and still claims many victims today through the Christian delusion and its witchcraft, as is still the case today in India and in various African countries, as well as in the civilized world, in Europe and America through well-known fanatical Christian sects, which is of course vehemently denied and also not punished. The disputing of reality and its truth, as is happening with the crazy and fickle as well as despotic dictatorial U.S. President Trump trample, contributes to the fact that many human beings, out of fear and cowardice, go along with the dictator's words instead of standing up to him and stopping his desire for world domination. But the elements of the world's various governments, as usual, just keep their big mouths shut, cower and let the madman have his way as he increasingly begins to impose his reason, so that his party comrades and the Supreme Court also cowardly agree with his insane ideas, endorse them, and affirmatively correspond to everything he does that is crazy and will sooner or later destroy America. Something that encourages many rulers of other states to do the same, but against which the populations do not rebel in any wise, but indifferently and irresponsibly let everything happen and allow themselves to be bogged down without doing anything about it. This is the case in Germany and in practically all states belonging to the EU dictatorship, with which the Swiss government is also tektelmechteled from the people, illegally and without their electoral permission. Just as urgently needed federal funding is being cancelled or is to be cancelled in order to promote and support biodiversity, nature conservation and climate protection, which are urgently needed for all life. Instead, however, the federal government is squandering taxpayers' money on motorways and other nonsense, but not on what is necessary to preserve and promote nature and all its fauna and flora, which are essential to life. This is also the case in many other countries around the world, where these are used as rubbish dumps in poorer countries, where diseases are spread and areas are made uninhabitable, despite the rapidly increasing overpopulation. the seeing and hearing that is indifferently and irresponsibly received by the rulers of all the states of the world, and by the followers of these rulers from the peoples, all of whom are completely indifferent to the chaos and injustice as well as the whole murderous warfare, especially in America, where a dictator is now tolerated and supported, who is terrorizing the whole world, and in Europe the EU dictatorship, which has dragged an absolutely unfree community under its rule and its nails, which lowly intelligent and simple-minded people have joined this dictatorship, and lowly intelligent and simple-minded Swiss people also want to do so, in addition to their idiotic and criminal airs and graces, to seek the proximity of NATO. The bulk of human beings are constantly creating more and more chaos and at the same time causing more and more mischief and turning away more and more from the creational order that human beings are fundamentally capable of, but which they disregard and are guilty of disregarding. This chaos of mass humanity has many faces, such as ignorance, disregard for reality and thus disregard for truth, relationship problems, violence, abused sexuality, thunder, sweaty labor, worry and pain, as well as despotism and the associated oppression, greed, restlessness, dissatisfaction, illness, lost dignity, insatiability, threats and limitations, terrible forces of nature and unfulfilled desires, corruption, loss of meaning, importance and vocation, hardship and misery, grief, plague and death, etc. These are the daily events and occurrences that manifest themselves in the lives of the majority of human beings on Earth humans. On this basis, human beings are completely exposed to their own endeavors to guide and lead themselves in such a way that they are spared and not exposed to such precipitations, and can therefore walk along daily with a good conscience and do not have to hide from their fellow human beings, because they do not have a good conscience towards them and have always hidden from them. If human beings do not want to let go of their bad and evil habits and do not want to let go of them, then they inevitably choose chaos and remain mired in it. This makes him guilty for himself, whereby he inevitably remains incapable of finding and doing the correct thing in order to recognize his being and bring order to it and correspond to it. The human being thus aligns himself in a negative wise, because he cannot let his own light shine within him, and also cannot bring it into the world. Consequently, he lives in perpetual darkness with regard to himself, and never finds the light of self-knowledge and becoming himself. For everything he also does is directed against himself, because he does not rely on himself but on a sham thinking and on a faith that is usually hopefully related to an imaginary helpful God, but not to a healthy and valuable self-thinking and self-help. The person who indulges in a belief and is not a real self-thinker creates evil for himself, shies away from letting the light within himself shine, and thus remains in the dark about himself, as a result of which no one can see his own shameful deeds of faith and illusory thinking. When a human being becomes self-aware and frees himself from every belief, then he becomes exclusively a liberator of himself and no longer allows himself to be tied down. For he experiences that he can use his energy and might in his life and break free from his chaos and his self-darkness. For then he knows that he himself determines his life and his weal and woe. And he knows that faith is only a lie, which dominates the majority of humanity and the world. And he knows that life is not given by a God, but is naturally created, that no rebirth can be expected, and that reality and its truth is more powerful than all the faith and all the temptations of this world. And it is only as a result of reality and its truth that human beings can live and lead their lives, just as it is also only through reality and its truth that they can judge, finalize, overcome, and conquer everything, but not through faith. The word of reality and its truth might make the difference between what is now and what will later become and be. But if a human being is already willing to be and or become what he should be, then he will succeed in many things that he will never find through faith. If he lives according to reality and its truth, then he will experience, learn, and also see how, what, and who he really is. From birth to the completion of life, life has many trials in its program. Consequently, the human being should also form his character of rightness, and thus increasingly have to prove himself in life, whereby he can also call himself happy and pass the tests of existence and thus always remain steadfast. If the human being remains himself, he will remain strong in life and will reap many fruits in many relationships. But if he separates himself from reality and its truth, he will never be able to achieve anything of real value. Many aspects of the order can become effective reality through reality and its truth, while other elements, such as aging or any genetic damage or death, belong to the order of creation and cannot be changed. This is because the human being, like all life in general, is subject to transience but is given creation energy, which continues to exist and creates new life again.
With that, dear friend, I have actually said everything I wanted to say.
That was really a lot and took up more of my time than I had intended, which is why I must leave now, for I have my duties to attend to. So I have to go now and say goodbye. But I will be back soon because I have to dictate everything that has been said. Bermunda, Florina, and Anjana will also come here, for they have, as they say, something special to discuss with you. But what it is, I do not know.
Nothing wrong with that. Besides, I will just let myself be surprised. Farewell then, Quetzal. Goodbye, my friend. See you again.
See you again.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 12 from Bernadette Brand.
Questions that reach me by email are sometimes extremely complex, but can be answered with a relatively simple explanation. Many human beings who are interested in creation energy teaching and study it in depth are aware that everything in nature is somehow connected and that there must be a fundamental exchange of information. However, they wonder what could be the cause of all development and evolution and how it is connected. One such question is the one below, which I was asked some time ago and which I have shortened a little here.
Question: what is the primary determining factor that, for example, a land-adapted creature hatches a hard-shelled egg as a protective measure, that a reptilian dinosaur develops plumage for thermal insulation and secondarily for gliding and flying and becomes a theropod or primordial bird-like, that creatures in the dark deep sea develop bioluminescence for foraging and communication, or that an insect develops a chitin-like carapace used for defense and advertising. What is the evolutionary factor behind these self-regulated changes and adaptations? It is obvious that fauna and flora, and also human beings, do not change their structural composition voluntarily or impulsively, instinctively, consciously. We are even talking about millions of years of climate and environmental adaptations. But what is this original urge that naturally drives all these transformations? Is there a driven evolutionary impulse energy that leads to these mutations? For example, an aquatic creature has adapted to walking on land, and in doing so, it has taken up the impulse instinct challenge of seeking more food and better protection from predatory aquatic creatures. But where did it get the idea to develop amphibious lung mucous membranes and even stronger gills on its own? It is equally obvious that through countless experiences in new environments, all that exists changes and adapts, whereupon these changes are memorized and passed on to the next generation as gene expressions.
Response: regarding your question about the evolution of all things, I will try to explain as briefly as possible how everything is connected. So, everything that exists in the universe is creation or is animated by creation energy, that is to say, everything that is material in some form. Creation energy contains the life energy of creation, which is responsible for evolution in everything that lives. This creation life energy is adapted to the forms of consciousness of all matter. That is to say, from the conscious consciousness of human beings to the instinct and impulse consciousness of animals, creatures, fauna, and flora, but also to the much lower consciousness of all matter. It must therefore be clearly recognized that creation energy provides the impulse for life, or in other words, that everything material is animated by creation energy. This applies to all material forms of every known and conceivable species and genus. therefore also to the body's organs and brains, or that which fulfills the brain functions in the individual species and genus of everything that lives. It is responsible for the fact that life forms can think and that their brains work, as is also the case with all living beings that have a brain capable of thinking, even if this is only capable of instinctive or impulsive thinking. The creation life energy provides the evolutionary impulse. It absorbs every experience, every realization, every change, and everything that moves human beings. For example, what they see and feel, etc., and stores it energetically, which it also does for every other living being, whereby it should be noted that the creation life energy always remains with the same genus and species that it animated at the very first appearance of this genus species. All this accumulated knowledge and the experiences of each life form are stored in the energy of creation and processed after its death, which then slowly and gradually leads to evolutionary adaptations and molds over time. Behind all evolution and behind every natural adaptation to changing living conditions, as well as every transformation, is the life energy of creation, which absorbs everything and makes every adaptation, metamorphosis, and transformation possible in the first place.